Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's webinar. This is Ahmed Farag. I am a PGY4 ESIR resident at the University of Kentucky and one of the co-chairs for the Communications Committee. Communications Committee is in charge of kind of moderating these webinars. Today we have a great presentation from the International Outreach Committee and led by Andy Moore and Yi Yang. And I'm going to pass it over to Yi, who will introduce our presenter.
Thanks, Ahmed. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I am very excited and very honored to introduce Melissa Culp. She is the current Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of RAD-AID International. RAD-AID International is a nonprofit public service that is focused on global health equality through providing radiology services worldwide. They are active in over 30 countries and in both providing diagnostic radiology services as well as interventional radiology services. And Melissa has been integral in creating several international service electives for radiology residents, that some of which are just radiology specific and some that are also IR specific. So tonight we've been very fortunate that she's here to share with us about her experience with helping to create electives specifically for IR. So I'm sure I have a lot to learn too. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat box. Me and Andy will kind of keep an eye on it and collect the questions, and then we'll kind of share them at the end to see, to like summarize what they may be, and we'll have Melissa give us some responses. Also, if you have questions that come up later on after the presentation, we can also share our emails with you. We also have a Twitter account too if you want to search for our names with MD at the end, and we look forward to chatting with you afterwards. And so I will pass it to Melissa now.
Thank you, Yi. I'm just going to get my screen shared here.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Melissa, you should be able to snag it now. There we go.
Do you have the slide up, Ahmed?
It looks like it.
Okay, all right, so. Okay, so I just want to start by saying thank you to Yi and Andy for inviting me to speak tonight. I've been fortunate in my journey to have met Yi Yang and Andy Moore both in person. And so they're both really outstanding individuals. And so this is really an honor to be here. I'm going to share with them and with all of you. So just to give a little context before I get started, the question originated from the International Outreach Committee of the Resident Fellow Student section. So the way I wrote this presentation is to an audience as though I'm speaking to residents and medical students, because that's where the question came from. So that's to whom I'm speaking during this. And the core question that came up in the invitation was, how do you write an international elective specifically for IR? But I think there's kind of a lot to this. So that's kind of the main question that I'm going to be talking about. And it's going to be very similar to like a how-to video on YouTube in some ways. So like if you're looking up how to tie your tie knot or how to change the faucets on your bathroom sink, this is like how to make an international elective with emphasis on IR. So if that's not why you're here, you may kind of want to rethink, because it is going to be very kind of detailed and nuanced about like how to do this. I also know this is being recorded, so I do want to state that this information is current to the best of my knowledge today, which is the 11th of May in 2020. So if you're watching this video in the future, like in 2021 or 2022, I would advise you to double check the ACGME website, because there are review committees that make sure that recommendations are up to date based on current practice. And so what the ACGME recommends in 2021 or 2022 in the future may be slightly different than what I'm talking about today. So I would just recommend you double check to make sure you have the most recent ACGME guidelines. So the way I've structured this presentation, the first half is sort of like why I think international experiences for trainees are valuable, because I think why I think this sort of informs how I've done it, and I think it can inform how you proceed. Why we do things always matters. So I've started out with a little bit of why I think it's important, and then we'll go through kind of how I've done it. So just to kind of move forward, I don't have any relevant financial disclosures, so there's that. I do want to acknowledge a couple colleagues before I get too far along. Andrew Kesselman is the director of RAD-AID Interventional Radiology. He's also an attending at Cornell. And then another colleague, Bob Dixon, is the program manager of RAD-AID Kenya with RAD-AID, and he's also the IRPD at UNC Chapel Hill. And both of these colleagues reviewed my slides for this presentation, and I think their contributions have made it stronger. So I want to acknowledge them. And then also a lot about what I know for international electives I've done with Bob Dixon at UNC. So definitely thanks to him for the collaboration over the years to be able to share with you here. So just to give you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from, I am the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of RAD-AID International, which, as Yi mentioned, is a 501c nonprofit that really focuses on sustainable radiology access and global health. And we'll talk a little bit about the methodology that we use. So that is one body of my experience. And that informs a lot about how I approach global health and radiology. I also have a faculty association at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And that is the place where I have actually written international electives for residents. So this presentation is kind of a crossroads of my experience of the methodology and the frame with which I view global health, which comes a lot from RAD-AID, and then the place where I've written electives concretely has been at UNC. So I'll be talking kind of about both those experiences to give you kind of a summary of what's out there resource-wise so that you can consider best practices as you're moving forward in this. So I want to start first with why my international experiences be beneficial for a resident, right? Like it is important in our career as you're starting out. So I want to kind of talk about like why I think that and why I've spent so much time kind of working on this. And before we get into that, the first thing I want to do is make sure we're on the same page about what I mean when I say global health. So global health to me is an academic field of study. So where we really kind of think about sustainability and measurement and capacity development and partnership. And I really love this paper from 2009 in the Lancet that gives a definition of global health. And one of the things it shares is issues that transcend national boundaries. So these are major issues, right? Like clean water and, pollution. Today, in the Melissa Culp version of elementary school, my children learned about plastic pollution in the oceans. And so things like that, like clean water and access to water, are actually health issues. And so when we're kind of looking at this in radiology, things we might think of are, communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and trauma. Like those are health things where radiology is really important, and where your actions as interventional radiologists and future interventional radiologists really make a difference for those patients. Like we know that. So kind of those are issues that transcend national boundaries though. Communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, trauma, those things span the world. I think COVID-19 is a pretty good example of a global health issue right now that we see is impacting everybody. So it's a good example of how global health is high, middle, and low income countries. And we all have to work together for solutions, which would be transitioning to the second point about emphasis on solutions that require global cooperation. There's also thinking about individuals and the population. So if you think about public health as a field of study, that's a lot of like public health at a population level. So if I do this vaccine, what happens to the population? And I like this Culp paper. It talks about, we in global health and global public health, we care about populations, but it's also like the individual. And one of the key things for me in my experience with global health is that relationships are the most important thing in global health. And so this mention of the individuals really resonates with me. Health equity would be another key factor, just knowing that we're not all starting in the same place. We all have different needs. So I might have different needs in my hospital than you do in yours, and global health tries to meet people where we are so that we can advance together. And another thing about global health as an academic field of study is that it's multidisciplinary. And in the big sense of multidisciplinary, like government, non-governmental agencies like RAD-AID, private sector, thinking about business and health, and how can we all work together to create solutions. So that would be kind of another point about global health that when I'm speaking of global health and international electives, this is the frame of reference that I have. So just briefly about RAD-AID, this is a nonprofit charity that was founded in 2008 by a radiologist named Dan Malura, and he is still our president and CEO today. And so we're a really multidisciplinary organization, which echoes the global health definition. So we have radiologists and physicians, we have technologists, which is my background. There's nurses, radiation oncology, so radiation oncologists, radiation therapists, physicists, public health professionals, really the full gamut of people that you might encounter in your radiology department. We have all of that within RAD-AID, and that gives us a really strong, robust volunteer pool to kind of address issues that we have. We do have a data-driven approach. So if global health is a field of study, we have to be able to measure our progress as an organization. We're affiliated with the United Nations and the World Health Organization. And to date, we've contributed over 8 million in radiology capacity development. There's over 13,000 volunteers and supporters that serve in over 30 countries. So one thing I want to kind of share with you, this is our methodology that we have. We always start a partnership with Radiology Readiness. And this would be really taking into account kind of what exists in the country. So what kind of radiology services are there? How are the physicians trained that use those services? How are the technologists trained? And then you, especially as IR, know this, like radiology doesn't exist in a bubble. You touch those other specialties very, very closely. So radiology readiness would take into account what other services are here. Is there oncology? Are there surgery services? Is there pathology? If I'm doing a biopsy, is there a path to read it and to analyze it? Because radiology doesn't exist in a vacuum. So then how does the hospital fit into the health system? Because the health system, those vary from country to country, and our health system is not like other health systems. So that matters. And then how do things get paid for? Like how does the payment model work? How do the patients get there? What is the road infrastructure like? What's the electrical grid like? So radiology readiness really takes into account all of that, like where are we starting? And then a conversation would happen with the partners about, well, what are your goals? So in this, radiology readiness is not a needs assessment. It's more like a baseline of where are we? And then we have a conversation, where are we going? And then together, RAD-AID will work with that institution or those partners to create a plan to reach the goals. And there's usually some form of education and training in that, because we really want to support the vision of the in-country partner. So this is their plan that they have stakeholder buy-in, and we want to facilitate that. So we don't ever want to do cases for, or take x-rays for, or read images for, because that displaces the local partner. We would rather work to support them in growing that local human capacity. So even though this is kind of an around the bend thing, I think your international experiences can contribute to this overall development of radiology in global health, because there's, you know, right now the World Health Organization has the statistic that we know like half the world doesn't have access to radiology services. So you being interested in this and thinking about it sustainably and using best practices can help with that long-term vision of increasing access to radiology. So you specifically as interventional radiology trainees, I do want to mention that RAD-AID has subspecialty readiness assessments, and there is an IR readiness assessment that would be supplemental on top of radiology readiness. And it has some questions in it, you know, very specific to IR, like, do you have a supply chain for consumables here? And what are solutions to that? Because you can't really fully develop an IR program unless there are answers to those questions, like knowing where we're starting, and then how we develop that out. So there's things about consumables and supply chain, like sedation, you know, do we have the resources here for sterile procedures, and the kind of things that you specifically do. And then this was developed further by Andrew Kesselman, the director of RAD-AID IR. And Andrew came on and started our IR program formally, and he uses the IR readiness and has started programs in Kenya, Vietnam, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Nigeria that all have emphasis on really strengthening the IR educational capacity, either within existing residencies or starting IR fellowships in those countries. And so those are, like, the IR readiness is a basis for starting these partnerships and really thinking about developing IR in global health. So the program that I'm going to be talking a lot about today will be RAD-AID Kenya. And so in 2018, Bob Dixon, who's pictured here, this is actually at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. So Bob went over with the team in 2018 and did the IR readiness at the University of Nairobi. And it was agreed among the partners that there was interest in strengthening the IR education in the residency at the University of Nairobi, and then also considering the potential of having an IR fellowship. And so this program has those goals that we're working toward over time. And so I wanted to kind of mention this in the context of you being trainees and developing an international elective. So the electives that I'll be referring to tonight are the ones that we've written at UNC. And our trainees that go, they all agree to complete objectives that move forward the progression of radiology readiness. So this is kind of in that question of like, why is this beneficial? I'm actually starting with why is this beneficial to the world, and I'll come back to why it's beneficial to you. But it is beneficial that our residents participate in this because they complete actual objectives and education that move forward the progression of this RAD-AID program in Kenya. So even though like one resident would go in 2019 and we might have another go in 2021, they have those individual experiences, but they fit into a broader context. And so I think personally that if thinking about like why is an international elective beneficial, if you think about it, it is beneficial to you as a trainee, which I'll come back to, but it can be beneficial to an overall program arc. And so this is one reason why I think I've spent some time on this, and why I really think it is beneficial, because I see our residents like Aaron Klein and Clayton Commander, and they go over and they contribute, and it moves the overall progression forward. So, and then Bob being the RAD-AID Kenya program manager, and then Dr. Mwango and Dr. Chacha Magabe at University of Nairobi being the in-country stakeholders, they can really see the progression over time. And so, you know, as we have residents go within the ARC over time, like we can see them moving forward. And it's just important that we communicate to them, like, your trip mattered in this overall progression because you did these things. And then it also kind of opens an opportunity for them to continue to be involved once they're finished with training. So that's a key thing, where I think an international experience can matter to the world because you're advancing radiology in the world. But I think it has to be done in the context of a longitudinal partnership for it to and to really think about like the sustainability and how it can build over time, which we'll talk about in the how to make an elective component. So how does it benefit you? Because it also benefits you. And, you know, in writing an elective, you have to write goals and objectives based on ACGME milestones. And I really believe it. I have seen enough of our UNC residents go and come back and say this was an incredible educational experience for them. And it's things like feeling more comfortable with your consultation skills, feeling more comfortable communicating with other specialties, really seeing that different isn't always bad. Like, different is sometimes just different, and that can be a growth experience. And so one of the things that I truly love and why I kind of hang on to this work at UNC is to see those residents come back and see how it has grown them and impacted them. So why do this? It matters to the world because there's not enough radiology access in global health currently. And then it matters to you. I think this can be a growth experience for a trainee too. And I'm an educator at heart, so that part really, I love that part myself personally. So now we'll kind of talk a little bit about how to make an elective, and I want to start with when you can go. And this is when I'm kind of getting into like what we've done at UNC as the concrete example here. So you may see other institutions doing different things, but now I'm going to speak from like the experience that I have from the electives that I've written. So this is from the DR review committee, but I think the logic holds true for IR. And so we hold this to our IR electives also. So we have DR electives and IR electives. And so basically the summary is the review committee recommends that international electives happen after the core. And as an educator, I agree with this because, you know, when you're a radiology resident, your first and most important job is to learn to be a radiologist. And it is mind-boggling to me as an external observer, the amount of things you have to learn. It's very impressive before that core. And so I agree that time it needs to be focusing on like getting oriented to like, hey, I'm in a department of radiology and I have to figure out PACS and the EHR And now I have to learn this core content of what it means to be a radiologist. It's your craft, it's your career. It's very important. So we at UNC do hold to this. And all of our electives, regardless of whether it's DR or IR, they fall after the core exam. So then specifically on your pathways, and this would be where I give Bob Dixon all the credit for my knowledge about the IR pathways. Basically, my core response on all of this would be, when can I go? We would say after the core and talk to your PD. Like that would be my baseline response. If you're IR integrated, we just had an IR integrated go to Kenya on an elective last year in 2019. And we did that during his PGY 6 year. And so for our ESIRs, that would again be like after the core when it fits with the curriculum and with, so we kind of have a multifactorial rationale about when an IR resident can go. And it's not all about them. It also in our program kind of links to when the faculty can go. And then, so because our IR attendings go with our trainees, like that's part of how our IR elective is written, that an UNC IR attending goes with the UNC IR trainee to the University of Nairobi. So we have a lot of people's schedules at play here. It's like, when can the IR attending go? And then when are they invited, right? Because it's not all about one university. The University of Nairobi has its own schedule, and they have oral exams, and they have commitments to their trainees. So that plays a part too. It's like, when are we invited? But my core answer here would be, if you're thinking about doing this, my recommendation would be after your core exam and talk to your program director about when it fits, when it makes sense for you. Because there's going to be things about like your case volume at your institution, and you know, when are you invited by your in-country partner? When does it make sense with your curriculum, like in looking at how your program directors laid it out? So that would be my starting point on that. The bottom question on this slide says, an international elective is not an option at my institution, now what? And that looks very inconspicuous there, but that's a heavy question, and I'm going to take a second on it, because I've seen branching scenarios of residents in this situation, and my core recommendation here again would be talk to your program director, and I strongly recommend that you follow the advisement of your program director. And remember that you're not a resident forever. Like if it doesn't work out right now, you have a whole career ahead of you. And so I just want to take a couple of, there's a couple of scenarios that could happen here. So say you ask your program director, I love global health. I really want to do an elective. Can we make one? And the program director is like, Resident Jane Doe, I would love to support that, but for these institutional reasons, we just can't. And I'm really, really sorry, because I know that you care about this. So then there's a couple of things you could do. You could ask, well, what if I don't do anything clinical and I potentially do like a research elective or use my vacation time? So your program director could say, well, let's explore that. Like you can't do anything clinical, but what would you do? Like, would you be doing some didactics? Would you be doing simulation? Are you teaching? Tell me what you're doing. And you could have a conversation about this. And the answer may or may not, it may be yes or it may be no. And so if it's no, I would just want you to like stop and take 5 deep breaths and think, because the thought, I've seen this happen, like where the thought has occurred to a trainee, it's my vacation time, I'm gonna do what I want anyway. like not one at UNC, but just like in the world of watching global health and trainees. Like I was like, this is a thought. And so my guidance would be, wait, think, no. Because there's a lot there. Like there's a lot of implications to every decision that we make. If your program director is telling you no, I would strongly advise you to follow the direction of your program director. And you think like there's your own career that there's implications to that decision for your own career. Like if your program director gives you guidance no and you do it anyway, then you're kind of sabotaging yourself because you're violating their trust and the trust of your attendings and your program. And then there's kind of the longer term thing where what you do actually impacts global health for your whole program. So if you make that call and that's your decision, you could be damaging the opportunity for potential global health for trainees that come behind you. So in summary, I would definitely always adhere to what your program director guides you on this, because there's a bigger picture. The purpose in looking at ACGME and a residency, that structure is created to let you learn in safety. It makes safety for the patients. It makes safety for you, so you're not abused as a learner, and it makes safety for your colleagues. So if you step outside of that, you could be putting yourself in a situation that's not safe for you and for other people. So just kind of think about the bigger picture there and know that you're not a trainee forever. And there are other things you can do. So if you can't have an international elective because of institutional things, and you talk with your program director about like, what are some, can I do something on vacation time or research time? And they're, it just doesn't work out. The guidance is no. Then I would make peace with that and think about like what else you can do to be involved as a trainee. So like Yi and Andy here lead the SIR RFS International Outreach Committee. You could also like do the RAD-AID Certificate of Proficiency in Global Health Radiology and get the content about global health radiology, and then build your program and involvement later when you're finished with training. You could go to a RAD-AID conference and kind of get involved that way, or volunteering with RAD-AID to do webinars. Like right now during COVID-19, we're doing a lot of distance education and putting together didactics and really doing case conferences and things online. So there's things you can do to still be involved even if you can't travel as a trainee. And honestly, like I don't know a ton of PDs, but the ones that I know really care about education and really care about educating the next generation of radiologists. So I would really respect their guidance on that if that's what they suggest. There's reasons for it, and it's a lot about protecting you. So even though that question looks inconspicuous, it's kind of heavy, and I've seen people make decisions about it. I've seen a wide variety of decisions about that, like across the nation. So my guidance would be follow your PD's recommendations, and remember you're not a trainee forever. So where do you go? So say your PD's like, yes, let's make an international elective. Where do you want to go, resident Jane Doe? So we at UNC have our RAD-AID chapter. So this is the UNC RAD-AID chapter, and the UNC RAD-AID chapter supports RAD-AID Malawi and RAD-AID Kenya. The DRs go on an elective to RAD-AID Malawi, and the IRs go on an elective to RAD-AID Kenya. And just some things I've written here, like we have kind of some minimum entry requirements that they have to be in academic good standing and have policy compliance throughout training. And one thing I think that's really important here is that they agree to complete objectives that support the radiology readiness for RAD-AID Malawi and RAD-AID Kenya. So yes, they're going on an elective, but they're doing something that moves the program arc forward over time. So how do you do that? How do you find a program? that exists if you wanted to kind of enter into one. What I'm going to do when I finish this is turn this into a PDF and send it to Yi and Andy. So if you're in their committee or you want to reach out to them, there are some links in this presentation that they'll have and they can give to you. But if you go on the RAD-AID IR program website, you can sign up to volunteer here to potentially get into help our RAD-AID Kenya, Vietnam, Ghana, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and all of our other RAD-AID regional programs where we have IR expanding. That's one thing you could do if you're like, well, I want to do an elective, but I don't know where to go. The other thing, I put Lauren Fuller's email address here. So we have a RAD-AID chapters network. And one of the things Lauren Fuller is doing this year that she's doing a great job of is matching RAD-AID chapters to RAD-AID regional programs. So if you're in a RAD-AID chapter and you want to start an elective and you want to have a global experience, but you're like not really sure where to go, and you're the resident laying the ground, like you're the groundbreaking person doing this, Lauren can help match you to an existing regional program. So I would email her and kind of coordinate with her to get matched to a regional program. So that's one thought. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. Like, how do you make it? So we talked about why, we talked about when, and always following your program director's recommendations and where to go. So now how do you do it? Like, how do you tie the tie knot? How do you change the bathroom faucet? So first, you've agreed to do some objectives that support the program. But in writing an international elective, you have to think about your goals and objectives too, because this is, for ACGME, this is going to be a learning experience for you also. I think an international elective can be leveraged because you can do objectives that support a program. So I think you can make a difference and learn at the same time. So what can you do? Nothing above your current level of training. So if you don't do it here by yourself, you shouldn't go anywhere else and do it. But things that our residents do on electives, they do didactics to support the program goals. So Clayton Commander went with a team last year to University of Nairobi, and he gave a lot of great lectures that fits into that goal of strengthening IR education in the existing residency. We also can have our residents do simulation teaching. And so RAD-AID has a partnership with Mentis, and Mentis has donated a simulator to RAD-AID that we take into our programs. And so this is something where Clayton is able, like our residents that go, are able to kind of work with colleagues there on practicing the simulation. So that's something that can be done by a trainee. Teaching about things like pre and peri-procedural clinical care, all of that communication and patient care and that kind of education is really important. And then I put here too just the relationships again, because in global health, the partnership relationships are so important. So continuing to nurture and maintain those relationships is critical. And every team member can contribute to that. So those are things that can be done on an elective by an IR trainee. Now, supervision requirements, I do want to mention, because you shouldn't be doing anything above your level of training. Connecting with an experienced attending is helpful, and then seeking out like mentorship from an attending, like, if you go with a RAD-AID IR team, we always have IR attendings on our teams. So making sure there's someone at that level that can mentor you and make sure you're operating at your level of training and can really kind of lift you up and help you kind of get oriented to the site and make sure you're really learning from that. So that's really critical, I think, in an elective or really any global experience, making sure you're being at your level of training and supervised. So, okay, this is like a heavy slide. So this is actually how the parts of an elective. And on the next slide, this is where I have links that I'll send to Andy and Yi that you can click. But I'll show this too, and we can talk about like how to find them on a search engine if you need to. But the first thing you have to do is write your elective. And I would start, there's that document from the ACGME review committee is helpful. And it has some things on it that should be in an elective. But then the next thing you need to do after the ACGME documentation is your School of Medicine's GME office. So I'm going to talk about what our School of Medicine's GME office requires, but you would want to look for the version of these things at your School of Medicine, because it will be slightly different based on the structure of your health system and legal and liability things. But your elective, the way we've written ours, there's background on the site. It's like, where are we going? And I actually, in both of ours, have the RAD-AID country report for the corresponding country. So the RAD-AID Kenya country report is in our Kenya one, and the RAD-AID Malawi country report is in our Malawi one. And we have 2 standard program electives where most of our trainees go into these, but I'm not opposed to writing an individual elective if a resident has a strong rationale for that within another existing RAD-AID program. But our residencies primarily support RAD-AID Malawi and RAD-AID Kenya. So we have that, the background about where we're going and what does the radiology readiness say and what are the radiology readiness goals. And then we have your goals and objectives. Like, this is important for the ACGME. And these we've tied back to the milestones. So under each like milestone header, there's goals and objectives for what you should be learning on this elective. There, in each elective, there's reference to your HIV PEP, because that's a requirement for our School of Medicine, that we have to document how you would get HIV PEP if you needed it. And for our Kenya elective, the team carries it with them. So someone on the team has to have it and get it and take it. There's stuff in each elective about your safety, you know, like what are some local transportations that are safe, and where do you stay that's safe, and like your physical safety. How do you, our School of Medicine requires travel health insurance and some things like that that are policy in our school. So there's also in ours, we have inclusion of our whole School of Medicine GME policy document. So that's just dropped in there for reference. And then these have to have evaluation on them because it's an elective, it's a block elective. So, and our school fortunately has standardized evaluations for international electives. So I feel really fortunate because a lot of the infrastructure for this exists in our Office of Global Health Education. Aside from the elective, our GME office has 3 forms that you have to turn in for every resident that go. And so there's an institutional agreement, which is signed by the IRPD and the attending at the institution, in our case at the University of Nairobi. And this agreement is a lot about protecting you as a trainee, making sure you are working reasonable shifts while you're there and that you're being supervised. And in some regards for ours, it's a little superfluous because our attending goes with the trainee and we'll make sure all of that happens, but it is required for the elective to be qualified as an elective, so we still get this form signed between the University of Nairobi and UNC. There's also a goals and objectives form that I help our residents write them, but then the resident and the PD, the IRPD, sign them. So these would be, aside from the big elective goals and objectives, these are specific goals and objectives that we write, again, for the resident. And then there's a liability waiver. So this is the third one. Like, you're choosing to do something extra, so you can't hold our School of Medicine liable for that. Like, you're making this choice. So that's that third one. And I have a link on the next slide to our Office of Global Health Education. And these forms are online. So if you look this up in your search engine, you can see what our versions look like so that you can look at your School of Medicine's GME office and find the equivalent. But that would be kind of to give you a guide about what you're looking for. The other thing I would say for our electives, and this would be speaking for the IR elective at UNC and really our DR one too, I know that our School of Medicine's malpractice insurance covers our faculty and trainees when they go to Kenya and Malawi if they are on school time. So if they're on elective time. Now this would be kind of one of those factors that might play in if you can't do an international elective and you're having that conversation with your PD and you're like, can I do something on vacation? Your school insurance will most likely not cover you when you're on vacation, if you're on vacation time. And you can verify that with your general counsel through your PD, like have your PD do that. But that would be a thing to think about. Like I know that our insurance covers them when they're on elective time, but if they're going somewhere on vacation, our school insurance will not cover them. And it is a requirement of our school that they have it. Like they also have to have malpractice insurance. And within our electives, they do get licenses. So the IRs get medical licenses in Kenya, and then the DRs get medical licenses in Malawi. That is just kind of a detail of our concrete example that exists that you would want to at least think about. If you're going somewhere for 2 days and you're giving a lot of lectures and all you're doing is standing in a classroom doing education and you're with a simulator and you're not around patients, I would ask your PD, you know, in that case, what do they think about these questions? But these are questions you should think about if you're making an international elective. And then does your School of Medicine care? Like, because ours really wants you to have these things regardless. And that's just the rules at our institution to kind of give full protection. So that would be where you need to talk with your program director, where this whole thing is really just a framework of things that you and your program director would want to look at together. So, and I do have these links where I'll share this with Andy and Yi. And if you're looking at this 2 years from now and you can't get in touch with Andy and Yi, you can just put these in your browser, and the most recent version of these things should come up. But so that's an option too. So how do you fund all of this now that you kind of know how to write it? You have to write the elective, you have to do these GME forms, you need to have a really thorough discussion with your program director. How am I going to pay for it would be kind of a next question that might come to mind. One thing I would say is that RAD-AID has an agreement with the Society of Interventional Radiology, where we have a global interventional radiology program where we've partnered with SIR. And one of the components of that is funding for SIR trainee members to go on RAD-AID work trips. So this is kind of where that model of fitting into using your elective or your global experience to support an existing program that has sustainable infrastructure would be, you know, helpful, because we also have funding to support that. And the way that you would sign up for that would be through our RAD-AID IR program page, and that volunteer and sign up link makes you kind of automatically qualified for that. So I do recommend like that as a resource. We right now currently are doing 3 a year, obviously not this year, but we can usually fund scholarships for 3 IR trainees that are SIR members per year. Other things you might look at would be the ACR Goldberg Reader Grant. The Doximity Foundation, you could decide if you wanted to do this or not, or felt comfortable with their terms, but they can provide airfare for flights for international travel and global outreach travel. I would also check with your School of Medicine to see if they have scholarships, because like our School of Medicine's Office of Global Health Education gives a certain amount of scholarships for residents and medical students every year for global health experiences. And this is really important to show your program that you have stake in what you're doing. So you're like willing to apply for a scholarship. Even if you don't get it, I would still share like, hey, I tried, I applied for these scholarships. And if you do get funding, like that's helpful to show that you have buy-in, because if they're letting you go on an elective, you're already getting more funding than you realize. So I want to talk about this for a second. And I don't have like full extensive knowledge of this, but I know that funding for trainee salaries in large part comes from the federal government. And when you go on an international elective, at least at UNC, that federal money cannot be used for your salary because that is to take care of US insurance patients. So when our trainees go on an international elective, our department pays their salary. So there's an internal kind of shifting around where they're not using that federal money anymore for your salary, and they're paying for our residents. And that, if you're going on an elective, I feel like that's probably going to be happening in your department too, because I know that federal money can't be used for you while you're on an elective. So this is already an investment. If they're letting you have an elective and you're going on elective time and you're being paid your salary, like they're already giving you some funding. So that's just something to be aware of when you're having these discussions that I really wasn't aware of until kind of further along in my relationship with radiology, that this was kind of something that they were doing, like an additional investment that they're investing in the residents that go. So so there's that. So those are some funding things to think about. And so, you know, we would love to have all of you volunteer with RAD-AID and to sign up to volunteer with us. I do kind of in summary want to just emphasize that I think global health experiences can be beneficial to you as an IR trainee, as a physician beginning your practice in your career. So I've seen it in our residents, and I love how they grow from it. So I do think it's beneficial to you as a person. I do think it's beneficial beyond you if you're placed into a program with measurable deliverables. So our trainees they go into support RAD-AID Kenya and RAD-AID Malawi. So they're helping beyond themselves. Like what they do carries because the program continues to carry. And then just kind of finally, these things, like all of this together, really works to advance radiology in global health. So that's kind of my closing thought. One quick thing before we take questions, before we start with that, if I will answer any question I get to the best of my knowledge, but if you ask me a question and I don't know, here's what I'm going to do. Like if it's like a super technical IRPD curriculum question or something an IR would know that I, as an MRI technologist, may not know, I will take the question and write it down. And then I will find out the answer to those questions and send like kind of a question and answer thing back to Yi and Andy so they can distribute. I'm sure there's like a mailing list for people that signed up for this. So I will take any question, but if I don't know the answer, that's what I'm going to do. So I wanted to just make you aware that that was the process I was going to follow ahead of time. So. All right, Yi.
Thank you, Melissa. So there's not any questions in the chat list right now, but I do want to emphasize and say, like, thank you for sharing that. You know, we are only trainees for so long, and I think that if you are interested in global health, and as well as service abroad, but if it's limiting you right now, there's other ways to get involved in. You know, you can join me and Andy or RAD-AID, or if there's something that you're interested in working on, but you're hitting some roadblocks, we're happy to be there to chat and kind of help you figure out what can be done while you're a trainee, because there's some challenges with it, but there's a lot that can, you know, there's still a lot that can happen at home within the U.S. Preparation makes any experience better. And then also, thank you for the resources. We'll share them with everyone, like especially with our committee. But if other people reach out to us after the webinar is posted, we'll respond back to them as well. And also, when you see this later on, feel free to email us with questions. I'm putting Maya and Andy's email into the chat, so if you're seeing it, you can write it down if you reach out to us later. Because I think, like, for me in the future, I would be interested in helping people create electives, or maybe even leading that later on in my career path. And this is a resource for us, for people who are interested in taking it further later on in the future. But thank you everyone for joining us. And I just want to open it up.
It looks like we had one question pop up.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Patrick was asking, are any elective write-ups available as templates?
Yes. I was prepared for Patrick. So do you see this slide where it's resources available online? Is that what's up, Andy?
Yes.
Okay. So what I would tell Patrick first and foremost, and he can write these, like the name of these, I think if he Googled them, it would come up, but I will also send this to you. So Patrick, Andy, and you will have this. But on the UNC School of Medicine Office of Global Health Education, I would start there first, because that shows you their elective policy shows you exactly how to write one. And then if you look at this one right underneath UNC Radiology's Global Health Leadership Pathway, this is a PDF. So if you go to this website, there's a PDF that has the Global Health Leadership Pathway. And on the PDF, there are links to some parts of our Malawi and Kenya electives. So not the full thing, like not the forms that the residents turn in every year, but the background and the goals and objectives and the safety information and the HIV PEP. Some of those things are available there. So I would say, like, you're welcome to look at ours as an example, but just know, like, you'll have to check your School of Medicine's version to make sure that you cover everything, because they may require some things that are not on ours. And then also, not all the pieces of ours are there. So like the forms and things that get turned in every year by the individual residents aren't there. So, but maybe that'll help. And our IR goals and objectives are different than the DR ones, because we do have focus in our IR electives about the kind of procedures that you do, and really thinking about like supply chain development, and it's just have a different goals and objectives because you're doing different things. So yeah, I don't know if that helps with that, Andy.
Great, absolutely, thank you. Looks like we have a couple more questions coming in too. In terms of medical students currently getting ready for rotations, so this is from a med student perspective, what's the best way to get involved in these global health initiatives without having the full training of having completed medical school?
That's a great question. What I would recommend to a medical student out there with interest in IR, if you go to RAD-AID's website, so rad-aid.org, and under, I might be able to just show you. Let me see, Andy. Is my internet browser coming up?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I will just show you. So if you go here, and then what we do, and then medical students. So we have a curriculum for medical students where you can kind of do an online training certificate. And then part of this program, if you do it and you're kind of moving forward in your medical student career, we can help place you into a RAD-AID regional program. So you would be doing things at the level of training of a medical student, though. You're, maybe helping with radiology readiness. You're kind of documenting what's happening in a program while you're there. You're kind of giving didactics at the level of your training, so about anatomy and things like that. And we would have an attending review what you're doing, but you would still be doing something that contributed to overall radiology readiness goals. You wouldn't, like, it would fit into the overall arc. And we've had medical students go into RAD-AID Peru, 2 of them actually. RAD-AID Cape Verde. So they've gone out into many of our programs. I'm just thinking of a couple coming to mind. And I'm working with one who will be kind of going out into Sudan next year if travel opens. So that's definitely a possibility. I would start here and sign up and do kind of the certificate to get the content, because there's things about radiology and global health that are kind of different than other specialties. So we have like equipment things and ethical issues, like ethical dilemmas about approach, and really kind of radiology specific things that this content covers, where I would start there. And this gives you a good pathway forward. So I hope that helps with that one.
Excellent, thank you. Do trainees continue with RAD-AID after they finish their training?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say, speaking out of UNC, so UNC is the place where I've written these electives, so I hope that might be helpful. But a lot of, like, I love trainees, and they do, like, they go on to become like attendings and work with us for years and years. So one example I would actually give you is Andrew Kesselman. So when Andrew was in R4, he started our informatics program. He was the director of RAD-AID informatics, and he did that outstandingly well while he was the chief resident, no less. And then he took a little step back during IR fellowship, because that's, you know, understandably so, requires focus, and those days are long. And then after fellowship, he's back now, and he kind of founded and started our RAD-AID IR program. And so that would be one example, but there's many, like, people that go through training. I would say, you know, in all of the regional programs, that's a thing. Like, people, once you go into a regional program, that's why the relationship part is so key. You know, if you come to love that place and you really care about that place, then you're invested in that program over time. So we're happy to have people go and volunteer as trainees and then continue. Like, that's the best case. So that's a great question. What else?
I have a really specific question, Melissa. How are you guys handling the delayed taking of the core exam with regard to the R4s being able to do the elective this year?
Oh, that's a really great question, Andy. Oh, so yeah, so that did happen. And we had, that's a really good question. We had them lined up. The first, I don't, like, it would have been August, September, October, November. That's when they would have gone. One thing kind of stepping back is that no international travel is going to happen this year. So even if the core was at its normal time, they wouldn't be traveling. But what we did offer is, I'm kind of excited about this, and it just shows how important global health curriculum is. I offered like a 2-week curriculum intensive of global health radiology, kind of the core concepts like epidemiology, pathophysiology. And so for the residents that had been the global health residents that wanted to do it, they are going to be allowed to do this 2-week curriculum intensive with me in part of a block. So they'll still be here, but they'll get the content support to be able, so maybe they can go on elective during fellowship, or we can kind of circle back with them when our school of medicine, when the country opens up travel. So that's a really great, insightful question. Anything else?
I think that's all I see. Yi, do you have anything else?
Let's see. Yep, I don't see any additional questions. And I think if people reach out to us about certain regions that they're interested in, we may kind of put a list together and
Yeah.
kind of send an email just to get more information for that,
The other
and
thing,
then respond to them separately.
yeah, the other thing, I wanted to
Okay.
say to your
Mhm.
point, one thing RAD-AID has done during the pandemic is that we've definitely been doing a lot of leaning on our distance education platforms. And so if in it, even if you're in earlier training now and you're feeling like it's just not going to work out institutionally, that would be stuff that we definitely need help with, that would kind of get you into a program and get you connected, and contributing and volunteering and giving back in a way that's sustainable, because that supports our radiology readiness goals for those programs. So those are things we could definitely connect with on too, if there's people that aren't going to be able to have global health like travel experiences during training. There's still things you can definitely do that make a big impact. So
Yeah, I think there's two current committee members that have region-specific interests that I think they would be interested in connecting with you on, and I'll try to connect you all by email afterwards. And I think it would just kind of be helpful for them to kind of get perspective from someone who's more experienced like you in that process.
yeah.
So it's just very valuable for us. And that's all the questions and comments from tonight so far. So thank you so much for coming to speak with us. And I don't know if like Andy or Ahmed has anything else to add, but I just wanted to open that up before we all say goodnight.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the thanks to you, Melissa. As someone who's trying to set up an elective at our residency, all this stuff is pure gold because it's not really written down anywhere, easily accessible. So to have it all aggregated in one place is awesome, and we'll continue to serve people. Thank you.
Well, anything to help you and to help Ian and Andy. I'm glad to help you guys. So.
Great.
All right, guys.
Well,
I just got to
thanks,
say,
everyone. Feel free to reach out to us, and thanks, Ahmed, for helping us set everything up.
all right, everyone, take care.
All right. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.